Good morning, everyone. We are just waiting for a few more folks to join and then we'll get started. I know it's only 9:59, so looking forward to speaking with you all this morning and appreciate you all for joining. I see a bunch of you coming in now. It's great. Hard to believe that we are less than 3 weeks from Election Day. Feels like we've been doing this both for 5 minutes and forever. So we'll just give it one more minute. Sorry. All right. Well, with that, I think we can get started. I think we have critical mass, and I am pathologically punctual, so I think we'll get on time. Great to see you all. Good morning. Welcome to the last in our series of Zoom press conferences going through our gerrymandering report. I have just a really great group of people here today who I will let do the bulk of the talking, but you all know Fabian Valdez, who's a demographer and really expert on the maps in California and the redistricting process. And I'm really pleased to introduce Patricia Sine and Neil Fornishari, who are a Democrat and Republican here in their personal capacity, but who serve on California's Citizen Redistricting Commission. So have been very steeped in this process of redistricting and have given hours and hours and hours of their time to draw the lines with no political agenda, just because they want to serve their communities, and are from two very different parts of the state. Neil is from the North State up in Redding, and Patricia's down from San Diego. So just even their presence shows the diversity of the commission. And so with that, I would love to just kick it over to our experts. They'll do a brief presentation, and then from there we will do Q&A after. So if you have questions, let us know. So with that, I'll let our experts.
Good morning. So I think we're going to go ahead and start with Patricia and Neil, who we're going to talk a little bit before I jump into some of the mapping parts I was going to mention. So I'll let you start, Patricia. Actually, Neil, I think you're going to go first here.
Yeah, I'm Neil Fornishari. I live up in rural Shasta County, as you can see from my background. I've been up there for a couple of years, but when this all started, I lived in Tracy in San Joaquin County in the central part of the state. And because I lived in San Joaquin County, the reason I applied for the commission was because of the way the maps were drawn in 2020 for Congress. In 2020, the California congressional delegation decided they didn't want to have a contentious redrawing of the district lines, so they decided that they would draw safe seats for all of the current, then current congressional representatives. So what that wound up doing to San Joaquin County was San Joaquin County was a Republican seat, but much of Stockton was Democratic. So they drew a very thin finger up from the south, from Stanislaus County, and grabbed much of Stockton and pulled it down to a Democratic seat in Stanislaus County and to the south, and that left a funky U shape for the rest of San Joaquin County, and not enough Republican bodies. So they snaked their way through the uninhabited hills of southern Alameda County, up through Pleasanton, up the 680 corridor to San Ramon and Danville. Still not enough bodies, so they snaked their way through the uninhabited hills of southern Alameda County and eastern Santa Clara County, and grabbed some bodies from Morgan Hill and Gilroy. And that was the district. So what we wound up with was three distinctly different geographic areas with really nothing in common, other than Republicans and the ability to ensure, or at least hopefully for our congressperson at that time, ensure they'd be reelected for the next 10 years. And it's a prime example of the politicians choosing their voters and not allowing the voters to choose their representatives. And that redistricting led directly to discontent among the voters and the passing of Proposition 11 in 2008, which stood up the commission. And then Proposition 10 for statewide office, then Proposition 20, I'm sorry, in 2010, that added congressional redistricting to the commission's plate. And one last note, if you look at Prop 50 maps, they're drawn eerily similar to the maps from 2000. So that's why I applied. And I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the process. So you can see on the right the requirements for the commissioners to serve. There were over 2,200 of us who put in a full application, and it was narrowed down to the 14 of us who served. And there was 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 4 folks with no party preference who served on the commission and drew the maps that currently serve the people of California. So with that, I'll turn it over to Patricia for her story.
Good morning. I just want to be clear, we continue to serve, the commission continues to serve. We have a 10-year term, so until the 2030 commission is seated, we are still in play. I also, and I also want to reaffirm what was said at the beginning, that we're here as independent individuals that have a lot of knowledge, and we serve, Neil serves as a Republican on the redistricting commission, and I serve as a Democrat. My story goes back a little further than Neil's. Mine goes back to when I was in 3rd grade. I went running to my mom and said, "Mommy, mommy, mommy, I know what I'm going to be when I grow up. I'm going to be the first female president of the United States." And my mom hesitated because I can't be the president of the United States. I wasn't born here. That evening, I told my dad, "Papi, life's not fair." And he said, "Mija, I understand. I was born in Argentina. My father was born in Argentina, and my grandfather came here as a young boy. And none of us could be president in Argentina because we're Jewish." So that put me on the track to find really my niche to be able to serve my communities in the best way I can. And fast forward to 2020, I hope that little girl is very proud of me for being able to serve and being selected from 22,000 people, as Neil said. It was a rigorous process, a lot, to make sure that we didn't have conflict of interest, that we were open to listening to a lot of people. And when we actually sat down to draw the maps, I want to remind everybody it was the pandemic. And so we needed to figure out, how are we going to do this in a pandemic? We had 6 strict criteria that we followed very, very closely. The first 2 are from the US, our US laws. So the Constitution says that every district has to have equal population, and that we need to comply by the Federal Voters' Right Act. The following 4 are really from the state constitution, and something that I a lot of times forget because it was so embedded in our DNA. We are prohibited from considering any partisan information. So we can't know where incumbents live or where political candidates live. We can't favor or discriminate against incumbents, political candidates, political parties. And we really followed these. The first 6 aren't a ranked criteria. So if equal population and VRA were the top of mind for us at all times. And in contrast, the current congressional maps that are being proposed by Proposition 50, all we know is that the criteria used was the ability for Democrat politicians to win. And we don't know what other criteria were used. There was no summary analysis that's been shared, and so that is kind of a concern. Next slide, please. Go ahead, Neil. Neil?
Myself, okay. This slide is a comparison of the process used by the 2010 commissioners, the 2020 commissioners, and then the Prop 50 map drawing. So we'll just focus on the process we used. As Patricia said, there was a pandemic going on, so we had mostly hybrid meetings. You look at criteria 4, and it's really about reaching out to the people of California and getting input from them on what they care about and drawing the maps based on that input. So we had 182 presentations where we educated the public about redistricting and how to get involved, 23 different panels to educate the commissioners in different areas, different community areas, all across the state. As far as public input meetings, we have 35 day-long meetings where the people of California could call in and tell us what their communities of interest are, how they wanted their districts drawn, what communities they wanted to be with, what communities they didn't want to be with. 36 days of public line drawing meetings where every line we drew was drawn in public with the public view, and we took public input for hours after each of those meetings. And then finally, 9 days of just input meetings on those maps. So we had, a great deal of participation from the public. And as you can see in the Prop 50 maps, there was no public input, no public participation at all. So, Patricia, I turn it over to you if you have something you want to add to that.
Yeah, thank you. In contrast, you can see one of the things we really did was make this public centered. We wanted to ensure that people could participate. So we got rid of as many barriers as we could. We increased language access, providing translation and outreach materials in 13 languages, created input tools that accounted for different literacy rates, technological abilities, and internet access. We worked with teachers to create a high school curriculum, hosted meetings at different times and different days. As Neil said, some of these days where we got input past midnight, and I don't think we counted them as 2 days, but and we intentionally reached out to those who lived in tribal communities, rural communities, and who were incarcerated. Really, in contrast, Proposition 50's congressional maps were drawn by Democrat politicians for Democrat politicians, and they were drafted so quickly that there wasn't a way to give public input. They opened the portal for public input a few days before the weekend, and by I believe Sunday night or Monday, the new maps were presented. The proposed maps were presented, and there was no way for the public to speak on those and give some feedback. Our maps were really drawn by Californians, with Californians, and for Californians. Back to you, Neil.
So we're going to talk about a couple of compare and contrast districts and a couple of examples. So the districts that we drew are outlined in black. The districts that the Prop 50 proposed districts are in the colors. And this is the far north of the state. The top right district that we drew, again outlined in black, is District 1. The one along the coast that goes from Marin to Del Norte County is District 2. So we drew these districts very, very deliberately based on a significant amount of public input. We heard from the coast a great deal that all the coastal counties wanted to be together for, for various reasons because they have common interests. And in fact, we heard a lot from Trinity, Humboldt, and Mendocino County that they didn't want to be with the inland districts from the North State. So we drew these districts deliberately. District 1, we drew it because there's a lot of common interest, agriculture, forestry, concern about forest fires, um, recreational issues. So we took a lot of time to deliberately draw these two districts according to the wishes of the people who live in those districts. You can contrast it to the two shaded districts. District 2 is the purple, I believe, and District 1 that would be the new District 2, I guess, or maybe the other way around. But either way, you can see that counties that the people didn't want to have together are together. You can see that Mendocino County is split and shared, is split in their proposal. You can see that the main population centers for both districts are either in Marin or Sonoma County. So it's just a guarantee that the Democrats will win both of those seats. And the representatives will come from the population centers in the very south of those districts and will frankly not represent the wishes of the people in the northern part of the state. So I'll turn it over to Patricia at this point.
Thanks, Neil. So we're going from a very rural, low density neighborhood to a very high density neighborhood. So shifting down to the border, and parts of the border are rural and very not as dense in population. And what we really heard in this area was keep National City and Chula Vista whole. They had been split over and over again, and they wanted to be kept whole. We heard from Imperial County that they did not want to be represented by a San Diego member of Congress, that they wanted their own district, and they wanted to be connected to Coachella Valley because they shared concerns regarding the Salton Sea and its negative effects on Latino communities. So in response, we were able to create 2 border VRA districts. And then the other, in what we heard from City Heights, which is the box over to your right, it's hard, I know it's hard to see, and that's one of the big issues, even with the proposed maps, is that it's really hard to read, to really find where you are and who's connected with you. But in City Heights, that's San Diego's Ellis Island, traditionally that district focused on the Latino community and connecting through Barrio Logan down to the east, the west part of National City and Chula Vista. But this year, in 2020, we heard a lot from the Black African immigrants saying, hey, we want to be connected with other Black communities and go east through Lemon Grove and El Cajon. The proposed 50 maps keeps National City and Chula Vista whole, and it continues to keep in separate Imperial County from San Diego. So that is good. But Rancho Mirage, La Quinta, Palm Desert are now with Imperial County. And there's nothing in common if you've been out to those, out there to play golf or be at those resorts with Imperial County and the Coachella Valley. And in City Heights, Bay Terrace and Lemon Grove, the Black community advocated to stay together, and now they've been split up. Again, we don't know what data was used when they created the proposed maps, but you can see all the data that we used at the commission's website, wedrawthelines.ca.gov. Fabian, to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both commissioners had some good points about how their process worked and specifically, input they received from the community and how that impacted how they drew the lines. But one of the things they mentioned in the beginning was they weren't allowed to consider political parties or incumbency, where people lived, anything like that. Now, I want to be clear. It is well known that in California, you do not have to live within the boundaries of your district to run in the congressional district. And I want to be clear about that. So that is not necessarily something that everyone thinks about. However, when you're talking about a campaign and somebody's running for Congress, if you live in Sacramento and you're running for a congressional district in San Diego, you can't say I'm from the community, right? You live in Sacramento. So it's usually when candidates are running, if you look on all their websites, you look at their bios, they say, I'm from this community. I lived here my whole life, and this is where I'm from. So it is actually a big part of their identity as a candidate to say, I am from an area and I can represent this area better than another person potentially. So again, the commission had no idea about where people lived or, political lines or anything of that nature. Now, these maps were drawn specifically for Democrat winnings, and that's not been that's completely understood. They drew maps that would benefit Democrats. However, they also were looking potentially at where people live. Now, I don't know that they had where everyone lived on a map. However, I'm going to show you a couple examples, and then we'll give a report after this as well that shows quite a few more examples of areas where it's very coincidental that the lines just so happen to move lines right around where people live, in order to maybe fix a problem with intra-party or give an inter-party issue. So I'm going to show you, these are a couple examples right here. First on Congressional District 22 in the Central Valley, which, as you can see, now runs from Arvin up through Fresno City. You can see in here where the little flag in the middle of on the left-hand picture, David Valadeo. You can see where they have the line drawn just right to David Valadeo, in order to basically say, oh yeah, but we're putting him in this district right here, and it keeps this kind of control of, okay, well, if we draw him here, then he's running in this district, and we can also have someone run against him. It's just interesting when they go and grab pieces right next to where a person lives. And yes, these are the registered addresses of elected officials, kind of where they sit on a map. And then on the right-hand map, you can see in Congressional District 31, on the top, you can see how the District 38 was drawn in order to create this new district that kind of lumps in some Republicans in the Yorba Linda and Anaheim Hills area with some more Latino Democrats in the city of LA or county of LA area. But doing that, they also redrew District 31, which is in the top portion, which is Gil Cisneros' district. And that district originally had El Monte on the left and Baldwin Park. And you can see when they drew this, Hilda Solis, who has also mentioned she wants to run for Congress, would have been in a district with Gil Cisneros. So El Monte is in the current District 31. So Gil Cisneros might have had a challenge from Hilda Solis. It just so happens these new maps, well, El Monte is removed from his district and there's no contention there. And Hilda Solis has her own district to run in. You can see how it scoots right around Linda Sanchez and it doesn't grab her area and keeps her in a district. And then you can also see Norma Torres. Gil Cisneros' district now goes into Chino, and rather than grabbing all of Pomona, they move around the northern part of Pomona and go down and grab Chino. And it just so happens Norma Torres lives in the northern part of Pomona, where she now is safe in a district as well and doesn't have to run against anybody. And she can say, I'm from Pomona and I want to represent Pomona. Gil Cisneros says, I'm Covina, I can represent Covina. And Hilda Solis can say, I represent El Monte, I want to run for El Monte. So it's just very coincidental that these lines get drawn in such a way that these incumbents are protected in their own districts. Another version here where we see that is in San Diego, as Commissioner Sine was mentioning. Again, we have Scott Peters, Sarah Jacobs, and Juan Vargas just so happen to have districts drawn in a way that lets them be in their own area. Juan Vargas can still be the national city candidate. Sarah Jacobs can still be a San Diego candidate that now moves out to El Cajon. And Scott Peters, who also lives in San Diego, just happens to have a district that moves north and not in the same area as Sarah Jacobs. So if you imagine if Scott Peters and Sarah Jacobs had been in the same district, you might have had this more, central city, downtown San Diego district suddenly where you have two people competing for, being able to say, this is my hometown or this is where I'm from. Instead, now we have two districts split, allowing them to run in different areas. And finally, we also have some areas where some more important members in Congress, when I say more important, I mean they have a little more sway, or maybe they have some more committee assignments, or they're more important to the democratic function of the Congress, had their districts not really touched. Nancy Pelosi, this is a really good one. She's, former speaker, important figure in California politics. Her district was changed, but I drew arrows to the two little blocks. They were changed. No population. It was actually just kind of connecting little parts that the commission had looked at specifically and moved. These are around little islands of land that has no population, that the county line splits. So those little parts, the top one, it's part of Marin County, but that little arrow points to that little divot, which actually it's part of San Francisco County, but the land is attached to Marin. And then on the right, you can see the same thing with Alameda. It's attached to Alameda, but it's part of San Francisco County. So they moved these little blocks, but they didn't affect her district at all. And there are a few other examples where people who maybe have higher positions in the Democratic caucus, especially in Congress, had their districts kind of stay as they were, and they weren't moved at all, even though pretty much all the other districts in the state were moved. And then finally, talking about the idea of political party and knowing where political parties lie in terms of in the maps and in the state. When the commission drew, they had no idea where anybody lived. Now, or where any of the political centers were. They didn't really have like a good understanding of, hey, this is, right-wing territory, this is left-wing territory. There's obviously some, anecdotal evidence. Everybody knows San Francisco is pretty left-wing. People know the Central Valley has a little more of a right-wing flair, but you don't know which cities are the basis of these things necessarily. And Commissioner Fornaciari brought up a good point when we were talking the other day. He mentioned that when they drew these maps, they weren't trying to draw competitive maps. They happened to draw competitive maps as an outcome of drawing maps without understanding where the political lines were drawn. When they were drawing maps based on community input and just understanding what the community wanted and just listening to the community, they ended up drawing maps that ended up pretty competitive. On the left-hand side here, you can see some of the competitiveness. These lighter red, like 3 and 40, are lighter red because Republicans only win by small margins. These numbers, by the way, are based on averages of the last 4 congressional races in these districts. Last 4, so I'm looking at going back and seeing how elections were run, and that includes doing the disaggregation, reaggregation up from previous congressional candidates in these districts in the previous maps. So you can see you had some pretty competitive maps. 22 and 41, you can see Republicans only barely won those. 27 and 45, I think down in the middle of Orange County, those were places where Democrats only barely won. And you can see 49, 47, 13, and 9. These are areas where they're lean Democrats are winning, but wasn't necessarily a guaranteed. It leads for these competitive maps where politicians have to, engage with the community on both sides in order to win enough votes to gain a seat. On these new maps, obviously they are drawn for Democratic advantage. However, you can see now competitiveness is pretty much wiped out. You have 4 Republican districts, and you do have 48 and 22, which you can see you can consider potentially competitive. They're lean Democrat, if you will, but pretty much all the competitiveness in the regions are gone. That is an important thing to note, because if you're looking at that left-hand map and you look at just the number of competitive districts that are currently held by Republicans, in a blue wave scenario, those districts can be won by Democrats. So if you count them up, there is currently in this map, you have 3, 22, 40, and 41, which are currently held by Republicans, that Democrats in a blue wave or with a right candidate and a good campaign could take from a Republican and win. So they can already win 4 districts just with the current maps. Redrawing it, yes, they have the potential to win these districts as well, but they're going through this whole process, spending millions of dollars and doing all this work to do something that they could have done if they had just run good candidates and talked to the people and run campaigns that were beneficent for the people of the regions and had the understanding of how these people want their candidates to act. And you still could have Democrat candidates that are Democrat Congress people winning in districts 3, 22, 40, and 41. So with that, I'll toss it back to the commissioners for some last remarks.
Sure. Patricia and I decided to move forward with our opposition to Prop 50 for a number of reasons. I mean, we oppose gerrymandered maps that disenfranchise Californians. These maps are drawn randomly. They just, we drew ours with input from the public. We drew ours to take that input into consideration, and they just randomly cut communities that wanted to be together, lumped communities that didn't want to be together, for partisan purposes. I mean, when we drew our maps, the commission counted voices. They count bodies. So California has some of the most competitive congressional maps in the country, which give voters the power to hold the people power to hold politicians accountable. There's no guarantee that Prop 50 will result in control of Congress, but one thing is guaranteed, that the voters are giving away their power to hold politicians accountable for at least 3 election cycles. We support independent redistricting commissions across the nation, but the argument to throw out, California's the maps from the independent commission at this time, rings hollow to us. And then, frankly, Prop 50 jeopardizes the future of independent redistricting commission in California and throughout the country. I mean, California is the gold standard for the country for independent redistricting commissions. Patricia, just want to see if you have anything you'd like to add.
Well, and I think you said something that's important, but the reason people focus on competitiveness, besides it being fun to watch a competitive horse race type thing, is that when you have competitive districts, we all win. Because politicians have to do their job, and we really want to remind politicians that it's about doing your job, and that it's about serving the people and not about trying to get more power. California's gerrymandering isn't fighting back, it's cheating. And this is just copying the very authoritarian tactics that a lot of us have been fighting against. And we want to remind everybody that the California maps were created by Californians, with Californians, and for Californians. And that the Prop 50, the purpose of Prop 50 is to propose gerrymandered maps, disenfranchise millions of California voters, and really put into jeopardy the future of independent redistricting process throughout the state of California. Thank you.
Great. And with that, if anyone has any questions, you can type them into the Q&A box or raise your hand. We'd be happy to take those. Okay, we got one question. So the PPIC claims the commission's maps are really similar to the Prop 50 maps. Have you all reviewed that report and have anything to say about that PPIC report?
Yeah, I've read it. So that report used a number of metrics to compare the maps, and they looked at compactness. They looked at city and county splits, and they looked at the number of majority minority districts and also minority opportunity districts. But the metrics don't tell the story, right? It's what's behind the metrics is what matters. And so competitiveness, compactness. The compactness metric is really a measure of shape of a district. A circle is perfectly compact. And then, so it compares the district shape to a circle. Well, in our case, I'm not a demographer, and I know that is commonly used as a metric, but it seems kind of meaningless to me as a redistricting commissioner, because what matters in our case, compactness was not about the shape. It was about not bypassing one population center for another. So don't bypass Fresno for Bakersfield. If the other more important criteria require it, then you have to. But it was the fifth criteria. Anyway, you can see that neither District 1 nor District 2 are compact the way they were drawn, so they didn't follow that. As far as splits, I mean, splits are only matter if you consider what's behind the splits, right? We made splits based on input from Californians, who they wanted to be with, who they didn't want to be with, how they wanted their city split. We considered that. Prop 50 maps didn't consider that at all. They only considered, bodies, Democrats or Republican bodies, and we need enough of each in the districts. And then finally, the minority, comparing the number of minority districts. And I'll go back to the San Joaquin County example. Those Central Valley districts where we made them majority minority districts. We considered public input. We did hundreds and hundreds of hours of analysis of looking at racially polarized voting to ensure that the voters of those districts, the minority voters of those districts, voted in similar ways, and that we drew those districts to ensure that we would enable them to elect a candidate of their choice. But now the district pulled in the district in Stanislaus and to the south, pulled in those are all rural counties. They pulled in those urban voters from Stockton. And as far as we know, they've done zero analysis on the commonality between a perspective from the voters from the urban Stockton and the rural counties. And so, they have no idea. No one has any idea if that's going to still give those minority voters an opportunity to elect the candidates of their choice. So again, the maps are not similar in any way. I'll repeat myself. We listened to the people. They counted bodies.
Great. A couple other questions. The yes side says there are fewer city and county splits with their maps, but it says the no side says there are more. Can you explain the difference in that?
Yeah, I can talk about that. And this is something going back to what Neil had said. The splits. First, I want to talk about what Neil said. The splits are important in that the way the commission split cities and counties was done on community input and racially polarized voting analysis. They used information from the community and information based on voting patterns to say these are the areas that this is where it should be split, if a city should be split at all. That's where it should be done. And so they did it in a very deliberate way in order to make maps that were good for Californians. These new maps, again, don't apparently do that. Now, when we talk about the numbers, okay, so if you look at the just numbers, the number of counties split in the new maps is higher than the number of counties split in the current maps. In the number of cities, there are, I think, 2 fewer cities split in the new map than in the current maps. However, when you talk about how cities are split, again, there was a deliberate way they split them with the commission. And they looked at cities that were larger and cities that, were smaller and said, well, these smaller cities, we don't have to split smaller cities. Specifically, a city that's 60,000 people. Why are you going to split a city of 60,000 people when that can very easily fit into a larger district, which is 760,000? These new maps split these types of smaller cities, and they split them more often. So you'll take a city of 60, 70, 80,000 people, and instead of just splitting it in half and saying, okay, well, this is how the city wanted to be split, they're splitting it 3, 4 times. And when you do that, I can guarantee you most cities didn't come to the table and say, we want to be split 4 times. That's not what they say. They might say, hey, split us in this way because this area is one way in this area, but they're not saying split us into 4 districts. That's not the way these cities have or advocating for themselves. But these new maps do split them more times. So when we say there are more city splits and county splits, we're saying they've split them more times. Another good example is actually Mendocino County. Mendocino County advocated to be kept whole, and in a coastal district, these new ones just split it in the middle. And now part of it's in one way, part of it. Mendocino didn't want to be split, and they're split now. So these new maps, these Prop 50 maps, do split them more times. So they split them into more districts.
Amy,
Great.
can I just clarify one thing?
Yeah.
Because we've used racial polarizing voting analysis, or RPV, and I just want to make sure that everybody understands we were only able to use RPV analysis because that is political and does show partisan information. We got the analysis, we didn't look at the partisan information, and we were only able to really look at it when we were looking at potentially VRA districts. So I just want to be clear that we weren't looking at it all the time.
Got it. Great. And then I think this is the last question we have is that, if the lines were to stay in place, say Proposition 50 fails, how many seats could Democrats pick up in the current election cycle if they just focused on winning competitive seats under the current lines versus the gerrymandered maps?
Yeah, I mentioned this in that one of those last slides. There are currently 4 seats, which if you look at in the last few elections, even if you just look at the last couple of elections since these new lines have been in place, they're pretty competitive. Everybody knows in a midterm election, the incumbent party of the president usually loses a little bit of seats. And there has been in California, especially, quite a lot of pushback against the current administration and the policies. So there's this idea that and it's been talked about a lot nationwide and in California that a blue wave might be happening. It might be starting to come up where there's a lot of people saying we're gonna, Democrats gonna be able to retake the House. Now, that's national and in California. If you're just looking at the districts as they're currently drawn, District 3, District 22, District 41, and District 40 all have very competitive districts where if there is a traditional blue wave, or even if there's not a blue wave, but it's just Democrat lean toward the electorate and good candidates are running there, yes, they can unseat the incumbents in those districts. These are all districts that did not have big margins. They're under 3 to 5% margins. So we're talking, this is something that a district can move over. So that's 4 districts that if Democrats were to run good campaigns, fund correctly, and look at and really talk to the people there, they could definitely unseat the current incumbents based on just the people's will.
Great. All right. Well, with that, I think that's all the questions that we had. Appreciate everyone for joining us today. We'll send out the report here pretty soon and appreciate Patricia and Neil and Fabian for taking their time. You all know how to find me if you need things between now and election days. I assume you will. And have a great rest of your Wednesday. Talk to you later.